The galaxy had once been a place of hope and unity. Many different alien species, each with their own culture and technology, had formed a great alliance. For years, the galaxy had lived in peace, bound by the belief that cooperation among species was the key to survival and prosperity. But everything changed when the Lotha, an ancient and peaceful race, came under attack by a mysterious enemy. The Lotha had been allies to the Galactic Council for centuries, known for their advanced knowledge of space and time. Their towering cities, built on floating islands, gleamed under their sun, and their wisdom was respected by many. The Lotha had long ago abandoned the ways of war, choosing instead to focus on understanding the universe and perfecting peaceful technology. However, their time of peace would come to an end. Out of nowhere, the Exar, a race of ruthless conquerors from a distant galaxy, launched a full-scale attack on the Lotha homeworld. Their ships, massive and nearly indestructible, shattered the peaceful atmosphere in an instant. The Exar's warriors, merciless and cold, ravaged the Lotha's cities, looking for something, though no one knew exactly what. The Galactic Council, made up of dozens of powerful species, was quick to debate what should be done. The Lotha, though technologically advanced, had become weak after centuries of peace. The council members, worried about the safety of their own people, hesitated. Many saw the Lotha as a lost cause. They argued that it was not worth risking their resources or lives to defend a race that had no military power left. As the debate stretched on, the Exar's forces moved closer to wiping out the Lotha completely. And in that moment of hesitation, a surprising voice echoed through the council chambers. It was a human voice. The human race, still relatively young on the galactic stage, had made a name for themselves in recent years. They had earned respect through their resourcefulness and determination, though they were still considered an outsider species by many of the galaxy's more established races. Humans had no ancient history, no ancient alliances, but they had something the Council did not: a fierce sense of loyalty and a willingness to fight for what was right. Admiral Ivy Dorn, a respected leader in the human fleet, stood up before the Council. Her eyes were cold, her tone unwavering. "We cannot turn our backs on them," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "The Lotha have stood by us in our darkest hours. Now, it's our turn to help them." Her words silenced the room. The Council was divided, but one thing was clear: humanity had chosen its side. Despite the risk of angering the Council or making new enemies, the humans vowed to defend the Lotha, no matter the cost. Admiral Dorn rallied her fleet, sending a message to the Lotha in their language, offering help. The Lotha, exhausted and desperate, did not trust easily. But they had no choice. The Exar were relentless, and the galaxy, as it seemed, had already abandoned them. As the human ships approached the Lotha's homeworld, the sight that greeted them was devastating. The once proud cities of the Lotha were burning, their floating islands falling from the sky, destroyed by the Exar's advanced weaponry. The human fleet, small compared to the vast Exar armada, came into view like a small but determined wave against an ocean of darkness. Admiral Dorn's flagship, the UNS Titan, led the charge. With every ship she commanded, the humans fought fiercely to protect the Lotha. They fought not only for survival, but for honor and for something greater than themselves. The battle was brutal, and the humans lost many ships, but what they lacked in strength, they made up for in spirit. As the fight wore on, the Lotha began to understand the depth of humanity's resolve. Their leaders, once hesitant, began to see the humans not just as allies, but as true friends, people willing to sacrifice everything to save them, even when the rest of the galaxy had turned away. However, the fight was far from over. The Exar, enraged by the unexpected interference, doubled their efforts, sending wave after wave of soldiers to the surface of the Lotha homeworld. The humans, with their advanced tactics and technology, managed to hold the line, but they were fighting an uphill battle. Admiral Dorn knew that without more support, they would not survive the coming storm. She sent urgent messages back to the human colonies, calling for reinforcements. As the Lotha's cities continued to burn in the distance, she watched from the bridge of her ship, knowing that the fate of not just the Lotha, but possibly the entire galaxy, rested on her shoulders. As the battle raged, a single question echoed through the minds of every human and Lotha alike. Would the galaxy come to their aid, or would they be left to fight alone? The war was far from over. The human fleet, having fought bravely beside the Lotha, had gained a temporary victory, but the Exhar were relentless. After each battle, the humans and Lotha regrouped, knowing that another wave of enemies would soon arrive. Humanity's resolve was clear. They would not abandon the Lotha, no matter the cost. Back in the Galactic Council chambers, however, the atmosphere had become tense. The debate over how to handle the Lotha's situation had reached a boiling point. The humans had made their position clear. They were willing to fight, to risk everything, to save the Lotha. But the rest of the galaxy was no longer so certain. The alien races that had once respected the Lotha were now turning away. One by one, representatives of the Galactic Council spoke up, expressing doubts and concerns. "We've lost too many ships already," said Korka, the tall, insectoid leader of the Wyreth race. "The Lotha have nothing left to offer us. We cannot afford to waste more resources on them." "You're not thinking clearly," Korka countered Tessel, a member of the technologically advanced Carry race. "If we let the Exhar wipe out the Lotha, what will stop them from coming for us next? The galaxy will be in danger. We need to unite and fight." The chamber erupted into chaos. Voices rose in anger, and harsh words filled the room. But no one seemed to notice the silence from one corner of the room. Ambassador Rin, a representative of the Jareth, an ancient species with vast knowledge of the universe, stood still, watching the argument unfold. The Jareth were old and wise, but their influence had waned over time. They had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. They understood the weight of history, but also the dangers of complacency. Rin knew the truth. The Exhar were not simply invaders. They were hunters, and they would not stop until every last galaxy was under their control. Rin spoke, her voice calm and measured. "You all are missing the point. The Exhar are not just an immediate threat. They are a threat to the very balance of the galaxy. They are ruthless, and if we abandon the Lotha, we will be next." But the damage was already done. The seeds of distrust had been planted. Some races were too afraid to act. Others saw no gain in helping the Lotha. Humanity, standing firm with its moral compass, was now isolated. They had no choice but to continue the fight alone. Back on the Lotha homeworld, Admiral Dorn paced across the bridge of the U.S. Titan, her mind racing. The recent council decision had only made things more complicated. The Exhar were closing in, and now they were fighting not just for the Lotha, but for their place in the galaxy. The humans had made enemies by standing up for the Lotha, and that made them vulnerable. "I never thought I'd see the day when we'd be alone in this fight," Dorn muttered to herself. Her second-in-command, Captain Jalen, approached her. "We're not alone," Jalen said, his voice firm. "The Lotha are with us, and even if the Council abandons us, we still have each other." Admiral Dorn nodded, grateful for Jalen's support, but she knew the truth. They were on their own, and time was running out. The Exhar were advancing faster than anyone had anticipated, and their weapons were growing stronger by the day. The humans had to act quickly. "Captain, prepare the fleet," Dorn ordered. "We're taking the fight to the Exhar. We don't have much time." Jalen nodded and turned to give orders. The humans had no choice but to push forward. They couldn't afford to wait for help that would never come. They had to rely on their own strength and courage. It was the only way they could ensure the survival of the Lotha and humanity itself. Meanwhile, the Lotha, though weakened, had not given up. Their cities were reduced to rubble, but their will to survive was stronger than ever. The human soldiers, though few in number, fought with an intensity that inspired the Lotha. Slowly, they began to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope after all. Lotha leader Krelin, a wise but battle-worn elder, met with Admiral Dorn in the ruins of a once great city. "Humanity's bravery will not be forgotten," he said, his voice full of both gratitude and sorrow. "But we have little left to offer you in return." Dorn shook her head. "You don't have to offer anything. We fight because it's the right thing to do." Krelin nodded, though there was a sadness in his eyes. "You are not like the others. The galaxy is full of greed and fear, but you are different." As the human fleet prepared for its next assault, the Lotha began to offer whatever help they could: ancient knowledge, technology, and weapons they had kept hidden for generations. The humans, ever resourceful, began to study these gifts. They knew that these relics might be the key to defeating the XR once and for all. But despite the growing alliance between humanity and the Lotha, the shadow of the XR loomed larger every day. Their fleets were massive, their technology terrifying. The coming battle would be the most difficult yet. As the war escalated, one thing became clear: humanity had made an enemy of the galaxy itself, but they would not back down. They would fight until the very end, not just for themselves, but for the future of all species. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the galaxy, the XR were watching, preparing for the final showdown. The days after the Council's decision were grim. Humanity, now cut off from its former allies, was forced to rely solely on their own ingenuity and determination. As the XR pressed their attack on the Lotha, the humans dug in deeper, preparing for a war that was becoming increasingly desperate. But amid the chaos, something unexpected occurred. A discovery was made, one that could change everything. Admiral Dorn stood on the bridge of the U.S. Titan, gazing out at the war-torn landscape of the Lotha homeworld. The once beautiful planet was now a battlefield, the air thick with smoke from burning cities and fallen ships. The Lotha, though weakened, had managed to rally and defend what was left of their cities. But the XR were relentless, and every day, it seemed, they gained more ground. "What's the status on the outer defenses?" Dorn asked, her voice calm, though inside she was troubled. "Still holding," replied Captain Jalin, who stood beside her. "But we can't keep this up forever. The XR have superior numbers, and their technology is far beyond anything we have." Dorn's mind raced. She had known this would be a difficult fight, but seeing it firsthand, feeling the weight of the struggle on her shoulders, was a different experience altogether. The Lotha were not just allies, they were friends, and they were now fighting alongside the humans in a battle for survival. But what if it wasn't enough? "There has to be something we're missing," Dorn muttered. "Something we can use to turn the tide." Suddenly, a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Dr. Elena Varick, a brilliant scientist and expert on Lotha technology. She stepped onto the bridge, her expression serious. "Admiral, I think I've found something," she said. "Something the Lotha never told us about." Dorn turned to face her. "What do you mean?" "We've been studying the remains of the Lotha's ancient temples," Dr. Varick explained. "And we've discovered a hidden weapon, something they've kept secret for centuries." Dorn raised an eyebrow. "A weapon?" "The Lotha have never used weapons. They've always relied on peaceful technology." "I know," Dr. Varick replied. "But this is different. It's not just any weapon. It's a hyperspatial engine, a device capable of manipulating space-time itself." Dorn's heart skipped a beat. She had heard rumors of such technology, but she had never believed it was real. The Lotha were known for their advanced understanding of the universe, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. A hyperspatial engine. Dorn repeated, her voice filled with disbelief. "Are you saying this could help us defeat the XR?" Dr. Varick nodded. "Possibly. The engine has the potential to create a distortion in space-time, something capable of destroying entire fleets or even entire planets. But it's never been activated. The Lotha were afraid of its power, and they've kept it hidden away for generations." Dorn was silent for a moment, considering the implications. The XR were powerful, yes, but if they could unlock the full potential of this hyperspatial engine, they might be able to turn the tide of the war. But it wasn't a simple task. The engine required a vast amount of energy to function, energy that the Lotha had never needed to harness before. "We need to find a way to activate it," Dorn said finally, her voice firm. "How long will it take to figure out how to use it?" Dr. Varric hesitated. "It's not going to be easy. The Lotha never fully understood how to operate the engine. They only ever used a fraction of its power. But if we can tap into its full potential, it could give us the upper hand against the XR." Dorn turned to Captain Jalen. "Get the fleet ready. We're going to need every ship we can get. If this hyperspatial engine can do what we think it can, it might be our only chance." As the crew of the USS Titan worked tirelessly to prepare for the mission, Dr. Varric and her team began studying the ancient Lotha temples, searching for any clues that could help them activate the engine. But the more they learned, the more complicated the task became. The engine was a relic, a piece of technology so advanced that even the brightest human minds struggled to understand it. Meanwhile, the XR were closing in. Their warships had begun to encircle the Lotha homeworld, and every attempt by the humans to break their blockade had failed. The time to act was running out. Admiral Dorn paced the bridge, her mind racing. She knew that without the hyperspatial engine, humanity stood little chance against the XR. But even with it, there was no guarantee they would succeed. The stakes had never been higher, and the weight of the galaxy seemed to rest on her shoulders. "We have to move quickly," Dorn said, her voice tight with urgency. "If we don't get this engine online, we'll lose everything." Just as she finished speaking, a report came in. The XR had launched another assault, and this time, they weren't just targeting the Lotha, they were coming for humanity. Dorn clenched her fists. "Prepare for battle. We fight, no matter what." The battle ahead would be the hardest they had ever faced, but humanity had never been one to back down from a fight. They had come this far, and they would not stop now. With the hyperspatial engine as their last hope, they would push forward into the unknown and into the heart of the XR Empire. The situation on the Lotha homeworld had grown even more dire. The XR were relentless, pressing their attack with no signs of slowing down. Every day, they seemed to gain more ground, pushing the humans and Lotha back further. But in the midst of all the chaos, there was still hope. The hyperspatial engine, a powerful weapon the Lotha had kept hidden for centuries, was their only chance. But it was a complicated and risky technology, and time was running out. Admiral Dorn stood on the bridge of the USS Titan, her eyes scanning the view screen. The battle outside raged on. Human and Lotha ships engaged the XR in space, but the odds were against them. The XR fleet was enormous, their ships equipped with weapons that made the human and Lotha ships look like toys in comparison. The humans had fought hard, but it was clear that they could not win the war through sheer force alone. "Admiral, we've received an update," said Captain Jalen, stepping forward with a grim expression. "The XR have started deploying ground troops. They're targeting the Lotha's last remaining strongholds. If we don't act soon, we'll lose everything." Dorn clenched her jaw. "We can't afford to wait any longer. Have Dr. Varric and her team made any progress on the hyperspatial engine?" Captain Jalen hesitated. "They've managed to unlock some of its basic functions, but the full power of the engine is still beyond their understanding. We don't have much time before the XR breach our defenses completely." Admiral Dorn nodded, her mind racing. The hyperspatial engine could be their salvation, but activating it required a level of understanding and precision that they didn't yet possess. If they tried to use it without fully understanding its power, it could backfire, causing untold damage to the entire planet, or even the galaxy itself. But if they did nothing, they risked losing everything to the XR. A sharp voice broke through her thoughts. It was Dr. Elena Varric, the scientist who had been leading the effort to study the ancient Lotha technology. "Admiral, we've made a breakthrough," she said, her voice urgent. "We've discovered a way to tap into the engine's power. It's risky, but it could work." Dorn's heart skipped a beat. "What's the catch?" "The engine requires a precise energy source to activate," Dr. Varick explained. "The Lotha's homeworld has a rare mineral, stellarite, which can be used to power the engine. We found a deposit of it deep underground, but it's heavily guarded by the Xhar. If we can't secure the stellarite, we won't be able to power the engine." Dorn clenched her fists. The odds were against them in every way. The Xhar had already laid siege to the planet, and the humans had lost too many ships to fight a full-scale ground war. But they had no choice. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. "Then we go after it," Dorn said, her voice firm. "We'll send a strike team to secure the stellarite. Do whatever it takes." The plan was dangerous, but it was the only option they had left. A team of elite human soldiers, along with a few Lotha warriors, was assembled. They would infiltrate the Xhar's defenses, retrieve the stellarite, and return it to the hyperspatial engine. If they succeeded, they could power the engine and turn the tide of the war. Meanwhile, Admiral Dorn focused on preparing the human fleet for a final assault. The Xhar were closing in, and there was no time to waste. She knew that this would be the most critical moment in the entire war. As the strike team made their way toward the underground mining site, tensions were high. The Xhar had established a strong presence in the area, and the team knew that they were walking into the heart of enemy territory. The humans and Lotha worked together, using their combined knowledge and skills to navigate the dangerous terrain. Lieutenant Marcus Hale, the leader of the human strike team, surveyed the area from a rocky outcrop. "We've got one shot at this," he said, his voice steady despite the fear he felt. "We get in, grab the stellarite, and get out. No hesitation." His team nodded, ready for whatever came next. As they descended into the dark caverns, they could hear the sounds of Xhar patrols echoing through the tunnels. The enemy was everywhere, but the humans and Lotha pressed forward, determined to complete their mission. At the same time, on the surface, the human fleet engaged the Xhar in a desperate last stand. The UNS Titan led the charge, with Admiral Dorn commanding from the front. The battle was fierce, and the human fleet was pushed to its limits. But they fought with everything they had. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but their resolve was unshakable. Back in the tunnels, Lieutenant Hale's team reached the stellarite deposit. They fought through a wave of Xhar soldiers, using everything from guns to grenades to cut a path to the precious mineral. The ground shook beneath them as the battle raged on above, and the pressure mounted with every passing second. "Got it," Hale shouted, securing the last piece of stellarite. "Let's move." With the mineral in hand, the team made their way back to the surface, but the Xhar were closing in. As they fought their way out of the caverns, the ground trembled once again, this time from the force of an explosion. The Xhar had set a trap. In a final, desperate push, the humans and Lotha made their way back to the surface. The UNS Titan was their only hope of escaping the oncoming wave of Xhar forces. The battle on the surface had become a frantic race against time. But as they returned to the ship, the question remained: would the hyperspatial engine be enough to stop the Xhar, or had they arrived too late? The mission was complete, but the battle was far from over. Lieutenant Hale and his strike team had secured the precious stellarite, but they had barely escaped with their lives. The Xhar were closing in, and the human fleet was engaged in a desperate fight to hold back the enemy forces. The only hope now lay in the hyperspatial engine. Admiral Dorn stood in the control room of the UNS Titan, her eyes fixed on the battle unfolding outside. The Xhar fleet was massive, and despite the courage of the human and Lotha forces, their numbers were overwhelming. The fight for the Lotha homeworld was becoming more desperate by the minute. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, a small spark of hope flickered. If the stellarite could power the hyperspatial engine, they might stand a chance. "Admiral, we've received word from the ground team," said Captain Jelen, his voice tight with urgency. "They've made it back with the Stellarite. They're en route to the temple now." Dorn nodded, her jaw clenched. The mission was far from over. The hyperspatial engine was located deep within the ruins of the Lotha Temple, hidden away for centuries. It was the last remaining piece of ancient technology that could tip the scales in their favor. But there was no time to waste. The Exar were already beginning their final assault on the planet's surface. "Get us to the temple," Dorn ordered. "Prepare the fleet to cover the strike team's approach. We can't afford any delays." The UNS Titan pivoted, its massive engines roaring to life as it sped toward the heart of the Lotha capital. The ground team had made it through the Exar's defenses, but the final stretch to the temple would be the hardest yet. It was a race against time, and the fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. Back at the Lotha Temple, Lieutenant Hale and his team carefully placed the Stellarite into a chamber at the heart of the structure. The walls around them were covered with intricate symbols, ancient and mysterious. The technology they were working with was far beyond anything the humans had ever encountered. It was a fragile operation, and one mistake could destroy everything. Dr. Varric, who had joined the team to help activate the engine, stood beside the machine, her fingers flying over the control panels. "I've never seen anything like this," she muttered. "It's beautiful and terrifying." Hale didn't respond. He was focused on the task at hand. The Exar were closing in, and every second that passed felt like an eternity. His team kept watch, their weapons ready, but the air was thick with tension. "Everything's ready," Dr. Varric said, her voice calm but strained. "All we need now is the final activation sequence." "Do it," Hale said, his voice sharp. Dr. Varric hesitated for only a moment before pressing the final command. The room trembled as the hyperspatial engine hummed to life. A bright light filled the chamber, and the air crackled with energy. The machine's power surged, sending waves of heat and light radiating outward. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. A loud, metallic roar echoed through the temple. The Exar had found them. "We're not alone," shouted Sergeant Kara Grant, one of Hale's soldiers. She fired a shot at the entrance, where the shadow of an approaching Exar soldier loomed. "Get ready." The battle was on. As the engine powered up, Hale and his team fended off wave after wave of Exar invaders. The temple's ancient walls shook under the strain of the violence, but the hyperspatial engine kept humming, its power building with each passing second. Meanwhile, outside, Admiral Dorn's fleet fought to keep the Exar at bay. Their ships fired their weapons with precision, but the sheer number of enemy vessels was overwhelming. Dorn's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the battle unfold. Every ship they lost was another step toward defeat. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, something changed. A sudden surge of energy coursed through the temple, and the hyperspatial engine responded. The ground cracked beneath their feet as a rift in spacetime began to form. "Dr. Varric, what's happening?" Dorn demanded over the comms. "It's working," Varric's voice crackled through. "The engine is destabilizing the Exar fleet. It's opening a rift in spacetime. We're about to have a direct shot at their command ships." Dorn felt a rush of relief. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The UNS Titan and the rest of the fleet fired everything they had, taking advantage of the rift in spacetime to deliver a devastating blow to the Exar command ships. The battle had shifted in their favor. "Prepare to activate the rift," Dorn ordered, her voice steady but filled with determination. "Take them down." The fleet launched a coordinated strike, targeting the heart of the Exar armada. The rift grew wider, and with it, the destruction of the Exar fleet. Ships exploded in a burst of light, their twisted remains sucked into the void created by the hyperspatial engine. But even as the battle seemed to turn in their favor, Dorn knew they couldn't relax yet. The Exar were relentless, and they would adapt quickly. But for now, humanity had a fighting chance. The tide had begun to turn. Inside the temple, Hale and his team fought off the last of the XR invaders. They had activated the engine, and they had done it just in time. The rift had given the human fleet the opportunity they needed to strike. "Mission accomplished," Hale said, breathing heavily. "Now, let's get out of here." As the team made their way back to the surface, they knew they had accomplished the impossible. The hyperspatial engine had saved them, but the war was far from over. The battle had been won, but the galaxy was still at war, and humanity, now more united than ever, would fight until the very end. The rift in spacetime, created by the hyperspatial engine, had done its job. The XR fleet was in disarray, their command ships crippled, and their once dominant forces in retreat. The human fleet, led by Admiral Dorn, pressed forward with relentless determination, knowing that this could be their one chance to end the war. But while the battle seemed to be turning in their favor, the toll of the fight had become evident. Inside the Lotha Temple, Lieutenant Hale and his team were exhausted. They had secured the Stellarite, activated the engine, and helped turn the tide of battle. But they had also fought hard, far harder than they had ever imagined. Now, with the XR forces retreating, they were left to face the aftermath of their victory. "We did it," Hale said, his voice hoarse. He looked around at his team, bruised, tired, but determined. "But I think we've earned a break." Sergeant Kara Grant, always the realist, shook her head. "Not yet. The XR aren't known for retreating forever. They'll regroup, and when they do, we'll be ready. But for now, we need to get back to the ship." Hale nodded. "Agreed. Let's move out." As they made their way back to the surface, the ground beneath their feet still vibrated from the energy released by the hyperspatial engine. The temple's ancient structure had held up, but they knew it wouldn't last much longer. The rift in spacetime was unstable, and every moment they spent near it brought them closer to the danger of its collapse. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the UNS Titan, Admiral Dorn was overseeing the final stages of the battle. The XR had retreated, but Dorn knew it wasn't over. The XR had powerful technology, and they would find a way to strike back. The question was, would humanity be ready? "Admiral," Captain Jalen said, stepping forward, "we've received a message from the Lotha. They want to negotiate a peace treaty." Dorn's expression was unreadable. "A peace treaty? After everything that's happened?" "It seems the Lotha believe the war is over," Jalen said. "They're offering to share their technology with us, including what remains of their ancient weapons." Dorn thought for a moment. The Lotha were a peaceful people, but their technology was unparalleled. The hyperspatial engine was just a fraction of their scientific advancements. If they could form an alliance with the Lotha, it might be the key to securing peace. But could they trust the XR to stay away? "We'll need to consider their offer carefully," Dorn said finally. "But right now, our priority is rebuilding our fleet and ensuring that the XR don't come back." The human fleet had taken heavy losses. Ships had been destroyed, and many soldiers were wounded. The damage to the fleet was significant, but it could be repaired. For now, though, the immediate threat was over. The humans had managed to hold the line. And more importantly, they had proven that they could push the XR back. But peace, Dorn knew, would be harder to achieve. The XR were not a species that could simply be negotiated with. They were ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. The war might be over for now, but the future remained uncertain. As Hale's team returned to the UNS Titan, Dorn met them in the hangar. The soldiers were weary, but there was a sense of pride in their eyes. They had done something extraordinary. They had helped humanity secure a chance for survival, and perhaps, for the first time in a long while, a chance for peace. "You did it," Dorn said, her voice filled with respect. "You turned the tide of this war. We couldn't have done it without you." Hale nodded. "We did what we had to do, Admiral. But there's still work to be done. The XR might be retreating now, but we can't let our guard down." Dorn's eyes hardened. "I agree. We've won the battle, but the war is far from over. We need to make sure the XR know they can't just come back and destroy us. The next few days were spent assessing the damage to the human fleet and preparing for the inevitable return of the XR. Dorn had called a meeting with the Lotha representatives to discuss the peace treaty. It was a delicate matter, one that could determine the future of not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. "We'll need to establish new defenses," Dorn said in the meeting. "We can't let the XR catch us off guard again. If they regroup, we need to be ready." Dr. Varric, who had joined the meeting, added, "We also need to study the hyperspatial engine further. There's still much we don't understand about its capabilities. It might be our best defense if the XR return." Dorn nodded. "Agreed, but we can't rely on one weapon. We need to build stronger alliances, gather intelligence, and prepare for whatever the XR throw at us next." In the midst of these discussions, there was a strange sense of hope in the air. For the first time in a long while, humanity felt as though they had a future. The Lotha, once an alien race fighting alongside them, were now offering their help. The hyperspatial engine had proven to be a powerful tool, and it might be the key to turning the tide not just in this war, but in future conflicts as well. But Dorn knew the cost of their victory. It had come at a heavy price. The lives lost, the ships destroyed, the sacrifices made, they would not be forgotten. And while the battle for the Lotha homeworld had been won, the galaxy remained a dangerous place. The XR might retreat for now, but they were not gone. They would return. And when they did, humanity would be ready. The days following the battle for the Lotha homeworld were filled with both relief and uncertainty. The XR had retreated, but no one knew for how long. Admiral Dorn and her crew worked tirelessly to rebuild the fleet and prepare for the next phase of the war. But amidst the tension, there was a growing sense of optimism. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they could stand up to a seemingly unstoppable force and win. As the UNS Titan drifted quietly in space, Dorn stood on the bridge, staring out at the stars. It had been a long and exhausting journey, but they had made it. The XR had been pushed back, and the Lotha, once on the brink of extinction, now had a fighting chance to rebuild their civilization. "Admiral," Captain Jalen said, his voice breaking the silence, "we've received a message from the Lotha. They're ready to discuss the terms of the peace treaty." Dorn turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. The Lotha had been an invaluable ally in this war. Their ancient technology, especially the hyperspatial engine, had proven crucial to their success. But forming a lasting peace with the Lotha and the galaxy at large was going to be a delicate process. "I'll be there in a moment," Dorn replied. "Prepare for the meeting." The peace talks were set to take place aboard the UNS Titan, a neutral ground where both the human and Lotha representatives could discuss the future. As Dorn entered the conference room, she saw Dr. Varric, the Lotha leader, and a few other key members of the council already gathered. "Admiral, we are grateful for your people's bravery," Dr. Varric said, her tone sincere. "Without your intervention, we would have lost everything." Dorn nodded, but there was still much work to be done. The XR may have been driven back for now, but the war isn't over. We must continue to prepare for the possibility of future attacks. Dr. Varric's expression grew more serious. "Indeed, and that is why we must discuss the future of the galaxy. The XR are not the only threat out there. We have seen their kind before. Ruthless conquerors who will stop at nothing to expand their empire. We must ensure that the galaxy is united, or we will face more wars." Dorn took a deep breath. "I agree. Humanity has fought to protect itself, but now we need to look beyond just survival. We need to form alliances, stronger than any we've had before. Together, we can ensure that no one species, like the XR, can ever dominate the galaxy again." The discussion turned to the future of the Lotha-Human alliance. Both sides knew that cooperation would be the key to survival. The hyperspatial engine was just the beginning. The Lotha had much more advanced technology to offer, and humanity would need to learn from it if they hoped to face the challenges ahead. "We will share our knowledge. Dr. Varick said, her voice firm. But we ask that you help us rebuild our world. The Exar may have retreated, but they left a path of destruction in their wake. Our cities, our resources, they have all been decimated. Dorn nodded. We will help. Humanity owes the Lotha more than we can ever repay. But we'll start by helping you rebuild. Together, we will stand stronger than ever before. The peace talks continued, and the more the two sides spoke, the clearer it became that they shared a common goal: survival. It wasn't just about defeating the Exar. It was about building a future where the galaxy's many species could coexist, defend one another, and thrive together. After hours of negotiations, a final agreement was reached. The Lotha and humanity would form a formal alliance with shared technology, resources, and military support. The hyperspatial engine would remain under joint control, with both sides learning from its advanced capabilities. A new era was dawning for the galaxy, a time of cooperation and hope. As the conference room doors closed, Admiral Dorn looked out the window of the U.S. Titan, the stars shining brightly in the distance. There was still much work to do, but for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of peace. The war with the Exar had taught humanity valuable lessons about resilience, unity, and the power of alliances. Captain, Dorn said, turning to Jalen, who had been standing at the back of the room. We've done it. We've turned the tide. Now we build a future. Jalen smiled. A future where we don't just survive, but thrive. Dorn smiled back. Exactly. As the U.S. Titan prepared to depart, Dorn couldn't help but think about everything humanity had endured. The battles, the losses, the sacrifices. But now, they had something they hadn't had before: hope. The galaxy was vast, and there would always be new challenges, new threats. But humanity had proven something undeniable. They could face anything as long as they stood together. The Exar were not gone, but for now, humanity had won the peace they so desperately needed, and they would protect it. The new alliance was only the beginning. There were still many frontiers to explore, many mysteries to uncover. And with the Lotha by their side, humanity was ready to face them.